we know that crime prevention expenditure does not correlate very closely with crime going down. And actually, if you want to spend an extra £1 to get crime to come down, you're far better off spending it on schools. And not just a slow burn, long-term effect either. The bulk of crime, particularly of the high-rising street crime, is committed by young men who should be in school. Right. So an extra £1 on the school's budget now is going to have a far greater effect on cutting your immediate crime than crime prevention.
Nick, I mean, Phil is suggesting that the CSR hasn't really raised the consciousness of the public in terms of spending. You issued a report last week that was very critical of the government's claim that the comprehensive spending review has linked investment to performance. You said there wasn't really much reform going on. Is that right?
Yes, that is right, and the government itself said spending must be tied to reform, and that's an admission that without reform the spending will be wasted, and we are talking about huge increases. Every family in the country is going to be spending the equivalent of £3,500 more, or the government is going to be spending it on their behalf in 7 years' time, and the state will be spending £1.25 billion a day. And the evidence is that that reform part of the equation is lacking. We still have a top-down centralised system where there is a lack of accountability, where there are conflicting targets, a proliferation of delivery units, and the evidence certainly in relation to the health services, that very big spending increases since the government was first elected, have actually not delivered increases in productivity. A 30% increase in funding, huge increases and more to come, but actually waiting lists have remained stuck at over 1 million, and the number of patients treated has only increased by 5%.
We kept health out of the poll deliberately, Tom, because we didn't want it to skew the response. People say that issues like crime, education and pensions are important, but isn't the reality that health has taken so much out of what the government has got to spend that there isn't really going to be a bonanza in those other services?
Certainly it's true. I mean, health, the one thing that we know going forward, we've got really big increases, 7% or so a year for the next few years, and that's building on top of quite a few years now where we've already had that. And no other major area of public policy is going to get that kind of money. How much is there left? Well, I suppose that it depends whether the government continues to prioritise education, which of course we know is meant to be its top 3 priorities, and it also depends on whether it feels that it needs to increase social security benefits in line with meeting its child poverty target. If it feels that it is obliged to do both those things, then I think we might find that there's relatively little money left for other services.
Phil, do you think that the government's ambitious long-term plans, like boosting the number of people in higher education, tackling child poverty, these things seem to me to look quite vulnerable now in the context of more money going into health and crime?
I think that's right. I think they're also top of the business cycle types of policies, and they're going to be vulnerable to any decline in the business cycle. So I think they are constantly vulnerable, which means the government has to go out and make that argument, and it means that we need that public conversation about what our priorities are, because we're constantly pessimistic about the fact we can't afford any of these things, yet we still manage to subscribe less of our national income to the major public services than most of our competitors. So the conversation about the mix of provision between public and private has only just begun. So I think we've concentrated so far on direct taxation as the only source of funds, which of course is not true in most cases, not true here, actually. And I think that conversation and trying to marry that mix with principles of equity is going to be the centrepiece of political conversation for the next 10 years.
And Nick, do you think that the government's commitment to invest in more public money is sustainable? There does seem to be a shift in the public mood in relation to this.
I suspect it's temporary. We may be at the top of a cycle where the public have been willing, arguing actually very strongly for increases in spending on key public services because they've seen failure. I think that could change very quickly if the spending increases are perceived not to have been effective. We're also talking about times of plenty and a time of relatively very low mortgage rates. That means that households are spending far less as a proportion of their income on their housing costs than they were a few years ago. Should interest rates start to rise, then I think that the kind of tax rises that Gordon Brown has introduced, which at the moment have crept through and have been tolerated by the public, could actually start to provoke quite a lot of resistance. And unless there's a step change in the improvement of public services, I think that the cycle will start to change again.
Can we pick up that point on, which is the broader economic context? Because today we've also had more bad news about corporate failure, stock market decline. Are there issues about the overall health of the economy in terms of whether the government can deliver its spending plan?
Well, if, as it looks like we might be, we're going through a slight cyclical downturn, that's absolutely fine as far as meeting the Chancellor's fiscal rules are concerned, because he explicitly framed those to be assessed over the economic cycle. Of course, the difficulty is if it's a nasty downturn, if it's a more sustained problem, then at some point, yeah, there'll be a crunch. And I suppose I should add that in the last budget, one thing the Chancellor did is reduce the level of caution in the assumptions he made about what the long-term performance of the economy will be. And to that extent, I guess the concern there might be greater.
Nick, can I just ask you briefly, I remember a time when governments seemed to be very responsible with money and the private sector was very disciplined, but today we're seeing billions of pounds being wiped off our pensions and our mortgage endowments by the behaviour of a few irresponsible fat cats in various parts of America. Isn't the reality we'd rather trust the Chancellor with our money than our financial advisor?
Well, no, I think you'll find that the irresponsible people in the United States will be prosecuted, maybe sent to prison. There will be a huge consequence.
Just a few
for the
rotten
companies.
apples.
There will be consequence for the people who do that in the free market economy. When the Chancellor grabs our pensions, as he did in one of the first actions that he did when the government came to power, there was absolutely nothing that the public could do about it. When the government indulges in off-balance sheet accounting, there's nothing we can do about it.
This is a debate I'm sure that will run and run, but unfortunately not today. Thank you all very much. From the state of the economy to the sexual health of the nation. In the last 5 years, the incidence of sexually transmitted disease has doubled. Growing concern about the problem has prompted the Commons Health Select Committee to start an inquiry into the government's strategy, and that starts this afternoon. We'll be hearing more on that in a moment, but first, Judy Leyburn reports on what some people believe is becoming a public health crisis.
Young and in love, or increasingly nowadays, young and infected with an STI. In the last 5 years, the incidence of sexually transmitted infections has doubled, and the fastest rise of all is among young people aged between 18 and 24.
I think many of us would feel that we've got a public health crisis on our hands, with increases in HIV over the past 3 years and significant increases in all sexually transmitted infections like chlamydia, gonorrhea and syphilis.
Not so much the summer of love as the summer of STIs. The club scene, with its heady fusion of drugs, music and alcohol, is part of a culture in which young people are having sex earlier and with more people than ever before. And while the safe sex message may be out there, it's not always uppermost in people's minds. Don't die of ignorance was the government's message in the 1980s. Today, widespread ignorance is just as potentially dangerous. A recent report by the school's health education unit found that 4 out of 10 boys aged 14 to 15 did not know AIDS was an illness, and the same number had never heard of HIV.
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 IV. No.
Diseases that you get from having sex with dirty people.
I've got friends and people I know who've contracted certain STDs, and you know, it's definitely an issue in this day and age with everyone being so sexually active.
We've taken our eye off the ball, really. You know, we had the big AIDS campaigns of the mid-80s, and in the course of those campaigns there was a lot of promotion of using condoms, safer sex, and since those campaigns stopped, we haven't really had any hard promotion of the use of condoms and giving people advice about the risks of HIV and sexually transmitted infections across the board.
According to a recent BMA report, unprotected sex is more risky than ever. Gonorrhea has doubled since 1995. Chlamydia, a frequently symptomless disease which can leave women infertile, has also doubled. Syphilis is back on the scene and increased by 145%, and HIV has risen steeply to nearly 45,000 cases. To tackle these rising numbers, the government last month launched a £47.5 million sexual health strategy. £2 million of this will be spent on a new awareness-raising campaign designed to remind young people that condoms save embarrassment and lives. It's been hugely welcomed, but those working in the field fear that if more young people come forward, clinics which have already seen a recent doubling in the number of patients will have to turn them away.
This is a very sensitive area. It's a very stigmatised area. People don't always want to come forward. They are shy of seeking advice. They feel that they're going to be judged and condemned because they've got an infection. And so anything that acts as a barrier to them being followed up is really, really a problem.
The government's allocated an extra £6 million for clinics to cope, but that's seen as a tiny fraction of what's needed.
The clinics can no longer cope with the increased workload. So what we're seeing is that people are having to wait much longer than they did previously. So, for example, there's been a doubling in the waiting times for patients to be seen for their first appointment in departments throughout the country. Now, that really has very profound implications for our ability to be able to control sexually transmitted infections.
So far, the government strategy is funded for 2 years, but experts fear funding STD treatment is still seen as a taboo, and that if the government does not put more money in, the health of the nation's young people could be seriously at risk.
As we mentioned earlier, this afternoon, the Commons Health Select Committee begins its inquiry into the government's sexual health strategy. In Westminster now is Siobhan McDonough, one of the Labour members of that committee. Siobhan, our film paints a very worrying picture. Do you think we are facing a national crisis in relation to sexual health, particularly in terms of the young?
I think that calling it a crisis takes our mind off how we're going to solve it. And the government's policy on sexual health and HIV is about bringing all the issues of HIV, AIDS, early pregnancy, sex education all together so that there's a clear line of responsibility how we're going to tackle that problem.
But aren't you alarmed at what the film tells us about the ignorance of young people? You're a London MP.
Yeah.
You must talk to a lot of young people. They seem to know absolutely nothing about the dangers which they're facing. How can the government get that message through?
Well, that message has got to get through on a number of levels, hasn't it? Both TV advertising, to advertising where young people socialise, to learning about this sort of thing in school, and perhaps in not a way where it's put into a bit of an embarrassing bit of a biology class, but more into the mainstream of looking at citizenship and taking responsibility for ourselves.
Now, you'll be talking this afternoon to Department of Health officials. What do you want to hear from them in relation to the departmental response to this problem?
I want to know that they've been talking to their colleagues in education and in local government and in the local and the big charities and voluntary sector to know that we're going to have a joined-up look at this, because it isn't the responsibility of the big hospitals or the individual GPs, but responsibility of government right across the spectrum.
And do you think we're going to get that sort of joined-up strategy?
Well, certainly looking at the document as it exists and looking at the targets for actually looking at for screening, for early diagnosis, all those sorts of things make me hopeful.
But don't we need to mobilise a broader public opinion here? It can't just be the government, and we're going to need to get some of our celebrities, don't you think, out there talking about these issues?
Absolutely. I mean, anybody who is recognised clearly has a very good message to give, and I hope that will be part of the whole. But it's important that we get how we're going to approach this right to begin with.
Now, in the film, one of the people we interviewed emphasised that even if the education was improved, there'd be a problem if more people turned up at sexual health clinics because the resources aren't there. We were talking earlier about the comprehensive spending review. I don't suppose sexual health is top of anyone's priority list, whether it's the public or the politicians. Do you think we are going to see extra money in the comprehensive spending review for this issue?
Well, I think there's overall more money for health, and within that it's sexual health. What the government's trying to do is not just to have a separate pot of money for this issue, but see that it's part of the mainstream, part of everybody's health, whether it's blood pressure, diabetes or sexual health. It's all part of the total, which is about taking the stigma out of it and making sure that our local health authorities have the responsibility for delivering those services rather than the rather fragmented way we do it at the moment.
Siobhan McDonough, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd be happy to go on a polygraph machine and say what I've just said to all of you. That was Ken Livingstone this morning denying allegations about an incident at a party last month. The London Mayor was facing a grilling this morning at a specially convened meeting of the London Assembly. At the meeting, Ken Livingstone strongly attacked the London Evening Standard, the newspaper that broke the story, accusing its editor of being reckless of the facts and of trying to force him into resignation. He denied allegations that he was in any way involved in the incident in which a man was hurt.
I did not see it. I was 180 degrees, my face was turned 180 degrees away from what happened. I have not the slightest doubt that as he struggled to get up the stairs, struggling round other people, he overbalanced and fell. I didn't push him, nobody pushed him. It was an accident.
In Westminster is our political correspondent Gary Gibbon, who has been at this morning's special sitting of the London Assembly. Gary, the meeting was a great drama. What do you think the reaction of the critics is going to be?
I think they're going to think Ken Livingstone gave a pretty good account of himself. It was more vintage Ken than last week, which was a rather narrow, lawyerly statement that he delivered. This one was much more a personal statement, going into great detail about what had gone on. And these Ken touches, which are great crowd pleasers. He said that the party he'd been at had people in their 70s at it. It was rather sedate. He said not the Roman orgy it had been painted as by the Evening Standard. And he had a Ken-like surprise for us as well. He turned round and said, alleged, that the man who it has been alleged he assaulted actually assaulted him.
He also claimed, as I understand it, that he'd been to measure the wall that the Evening Standard said was 15 foot high, and it was actually 10 foot high. That was another great Ken moment, wasn't it?
Yes, he said he'd wandered up there in his own time, he was at great pains to say, with the tape measure, taken the tube up, another Ken touch, and he'd gone and measured the thing. And he said the newspaper had enormously exaggerated that, so how could you trust anything else in their account?
So, unless new allegations emerge, do you think that Ken Livingstone's weathered this particular storm?
Well, he's going to be damaged by it. He admitted as much. He knows that some mud sticks. He also knows that his chances of getting back into the Labour Party may well be affected by this just because mud sticks. But he does think that the lot depends now on how the Standard responds, the Evening Standard. He was saying that he thinks the newspaper is a disgrace. Well, the newspaper has to come back with some pretty strong defences of its story. Otherwise, in this duel, they're going to look like the losers.
I was very taken this morning by the fact that most parts of the GLA, different parties, seem to be supportive of Ken. He was attacking the media. We're back into the debate we were having over the last few weeks, which is that the opposition seems to be the media. The debate is between bits of government and the media rather than within the political establishment. It's put that whole question right back in the limelight, hasn't it?
Yes, the political class generally feels somewhat helpless if one part or one stable in the newspaper industry decides to start attacking it. And Ken Livingstone was saying that he thought the Press Complaints Commission was toothless. He said they'd failed to do anything when he'd been photographed in his swimming trunks in Cuba. He said that he didn't think the libel courts were up to much. He'd been pretty unimpressed by them when it had been alleged in one newspaper that he'd had £250,000 put in his bank account by Colonel Gaddafi. So he doesn't think that the politicians have much recourse except to talk to the people, hope to speak over the newspapers to the people, and he thinks, anecdotally, that the people are supporting him through this one.
So just in a word, Gary, do you think the Evening Standard will be saying sorry?
We don't know what they're going to say, but I suspect the word won't be sorry.
Gary Gibbon, thank you very much. That's all for Powerhouse for now. Goodbye.
He taught himself, and the results are superb. Enter a botanist's breathtaking haven, next in My Eden.
That's out. Now then. Could be. It is. What a catch. 4 more. Glorious. This could be a run out.
England take on the big hitters of India and Sri Lanka in the Natwest one-day series. Highlights start Thursday at 11:40 on 4.
We can't go on like this. We haven't any money and everything we try gets us deeper in debt.
I know.
They wouldn't take any of my cards at the supermarket today. What are we going to do?
We'll solve it somehow.
Debt Free Direct can help you find a solution. If you have a regular household income, call us free. We'll take time to give you free, impartial advice in confidence that could help you free yourself from debt. So call Debt Free Direct now on 08000 93 23 23.
Checked it twice, been over the circuits.
Need a hand?
We're going to have to go back to the depot and sort this one out.
At Dolphin this week, absolutely everything is half price. Call 0800 626 717. Dolphin, the complete bathroom people.
Sorry, mate. You're useless.
Show me the silver. Show me the gold.
Party clock, is it true you're moving to Italy? What about the baby?
Okay.
Carlsberg aren't football agents, but if we were, we'd probably be the best football agents in the world.
Drivers over 50 are 31% less likely to make a claim on their motor insurance than those under 50. If you believe that more experienced drivers deserve lower premiums, call Saga on 0800 50 33 33 and ask for a quote. Saga's low-cost motor insurance is designed for people over 50. So call now on 0800 50 33 33. You'll be amazed how far your premium could fall. Saga. Experience has its rewards.
Sir Alf Ramsey. He saw it as the ultimate role in football. The only England manager to have won the World Cup.
They don't seem to honour people who really achieved something for this country.
They've done him in.
Here was a man who'd won that coveted trophy, and I'd been part of a committee that had decided that he should go.
Why was he abandoned by the nation he loved? Sir Alf Ramsey, Saturday at 9 on 4.
Multiple emergencies in 5 minutes in ER. First on 4 daytime, relax yourself in Ident.
So I may be more drawn towards places where nature, whatever that is, rules rather than some human-imposed scheme of things. Maybe there's something about me that doesn't like schemes of things. There may be something about that, something of the rebel against formality and structure and statistics and things that are sort of deliberately done. Well, I always loved the countryside, and for me, open spaces were a refuge from all the pressures of school and